So it's now 5:15. That's been stirring for 15 minutes. And we are going to need to cool that back in an ice bath, which I prepared while we're off camera. And we're going to be adding a gram each of sodium thiosulfate and sodium hydroxide. Now I'm going to measure those into this 10 milliliter beaker to use as a transfer. Add another scoop. The sodium thiosulfate is more crystalline. I'm going to measure that one out first. The sodium hydroxide is pretty powdery. It's been ground up. So we'll stir that a little bit to make sure there aren't any really large chunks. It takes a while to dissolve if it's all chunky. And it's not critical to be really careful with the masses. So I have 1.061 grams of the sodium 1.060 grams of the sodium thiosulfate. I'll just give this a little wipe. And I'm going to tear that again. And I got a little bit of sodium thiosulfate on the balance pan, so we'll scoot that off of there. Oops. Didn't mean to tear that. There we go, that's teared. This has a bunch of crust, so I'm going to open it over the trash can so that that crust doesn't get all over the place. It's really kind of a mess. That's why I was wearing the gloves. So a lot of sodium hydroxide all over the edges. It's 0.4 so far. Six. I don't want to get sodium hydroxide on the balance because it eats the balance pan. That's why I'm measuring it out here. It's about 0.95, just a tiny bit more. That should do it. .983. Balance is fluctuating a little more than usual today. So now we have 1.102 grams, which is a little more than we needed, but that's perfectly fine. Put the cap back on there. take this over, mix those two together. By now that should be cool. You'll notice that sodium hydroxide is pulling moisture out of the air and sticking like crazy to everything. It's definitely a messy process. Powdered sodium hydroxide. It's a pretty moist day today. It's been raining. And I'm just going to add a little bit of water. Try to get the last bits of that in. And now we are going to crank that stirrer up and wait for those solids to dissolve. And while that's happening, I'm going to clean up the balance. And we can put these back where they belong. Sodium thiosulfate and sodium hydroxide actually gets stored in a different location. There's definitely a little bit of solid on the balance pan. So we're going to take that out of there. Sweep that into the trash. Clean this properly. Just to make sure there's no sodium hydroxide left anywhere. Sodium hydroxide generates a lot of heat when dissolved in water. That's why we cooled this into the ice bath. But once it's mostly dissolved, I can remove that ice bath, let it warm up. These guys can probably be tipped back upside down. Don't need that anymore. So we're going to need another vacuum filtration apparatus for this. So get that out while we're waiting. 50 ml flask. Clean Hirsch funnel with a number 2 adapter. See if I can get out just one piece of paper instead of spilling. Tweezers in here somewhere. And we can set that up in the same apparatus we had before. that same procedure and wet that down with a little bit of water. Make sure all the holes are sealed up tight. That'll be ready when we need it. At this point, I think it's safe to remove the ice bath. Save a little bit of that ice water for rinsing. And what we want is we want all that solid to dissolve. Turn off the stirrer, pull this out and make sure that our solids are gone. And we got a little bit of sodium thiosulfate left. Hasn't dissolved completely. You can see the sodium thiosulfate is down there and kind of almost colorless crystals. Takes a little longer to dissolve than sodium hydroxide. I'll let that go a little longer. And once that solid is dissolved, we'll put this back in the ice bath. So I'm going to go grab some more ice. And hopefully our solid will precipitate. I'm just moving the flask around to try to get the stir bar to grab the last traces of that sodium thiosulfate. Sodium thiosulfate is a reducing agent that's going to react with the excess oxidant from the bleach. And sodium hydroxide, of course, is going to neutralize the acetic acid. So we had about 12 milliliters of the aqueous solution. We had about 6 milliliters of the 95% ethanol, 5 milliliters of acetic acid, which is going to be quenched to sodium acetate. So we're not quite at a 50-50 mixture of ethanol and water here. Got a little bit more water, a little bit less ethanol. I'm still seeing a little bit sodium thiosulfate, being stubborn. Let that go a little longer. Crank that up to full speed at 900.